It is June 7, 1943, and over the South Pacific, a squadron of new aircraft has just taken to the skies. These odd-looking bent-wing birds are the F4U Corsair, flown by American Marines, who are now headed to intercept a Japanese raid, which is reported as headed straight for their bases on Guadalcanal. In the coming clash, a vicious dogfight would break out, with a skilled group of Japanese pilots giving the Americans and their new aircraft a run for their money. As losses are taken on both sides, one unforgettable story unravels when not one, but two American pilots would bail out, quickly discovering that leaping from a crippled fighter by no means meant safety. With Japanese pilots who would stop at nothing to kill them in deadly waters below, the next few moments would turn into terrifying experiences for both, as the young and desperate Marines had to survive the impossible. With the calendar now turning to the summer of 1943, the battle in the Pacific is seeing a change in the balance of the air war, as the first of a new aircraft has just arrived at the front for Allied forces. This would be the F4U Corsair, seeing its first assignments to the Marines based at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. One of these early Corsair units is VMF 112, also known as the Wolfpack. In the past months, they have taken their unique-looking new aircraft into the air against the Japanese. They have seen success with a handful of pilots scoring victories in their F4Us, but not without cost. At this time, the Japanese were still a very real threat in the skies over the Pacific, with many aces in their ranks. And using these pilots, they were currently attempting to hit the American air bases on Guadalcanal in hopes of pushing back Allied air power. These would come in large strike forces of often more than 100 aircraft, and the only real defense was the fighter groups stationed at Henderson. These circumstances would set the stage for a massive air battle on June 7, 1943. Taking a look at the war diary for VMF 112, we can see exactly how things began to unravel. Here on Henderson Field at approximately 10:20 a.m., orders came in to scramble all available aircraft to intercept an enemy force 150 miles out and coming down the slot, which referred to the path down the middle of the Solomon Islands. With Corsair pilots sprinting to their planes to get to the air as fast as possible, let's take a look at the flight that we will focus on. This is the third flight, led by Captain and Ace Donahue, with Lieutenants Logan, Stack, Wilcox, and Percy behind. After getting into the air and forming up, they arrived at the expected intercept area. But as they flew over the Russell Islands, cloud cover was thick, and very soon, flights began to get separated just before meeting the incoming Japanese raiders. The VMF 112 pilots lost most of their formation and unit cohesiveness as they flew through the low visibility. The only good thing is that they were flying the newest cutting-edge aircraft that the U.S. Armed Forces had to offer. And while these pilots are trying to find their way through the clouds, let's talk about how cutting-edge tech can help you as well, with this video's sponsor, the Plod Note. In case you don't know, Plod is a company that's actually using AI in a good way. What Plod Note does is when you're listening to lectures, presentations, or on business phone calls, just turn it on and it records and then uses advanced AI to extract key points and formed well-organized notes, making sure you don't forget anything and stay on top of your work. Sure, your phone can record, but it's not designed for it. The sound is muddy, background noise is everywhere, and the moment you hit record, your phone is basically useless for anything else. But the Plod Note goes way further. It's compatible with 112 languages and only the size of a credit card. Plus, their Ask AI feature can help you retrieve information and provide suggestions and insights. It's like having a secretary by your side. For example, I recently took a tour of my local aviation museum and got to see some great aircraft. Using my Plod Note, I was able to transcribe all of the tour into some great key points for me to study later, helping me to learn more and forget less. So if you want to improve your organization and note-taking, head to plod.ai and use code TJ3 for a special discount. Thanks again to Plod, and now I believe the cloud cover over the Pacific was just breaking. As the low visibility finally ended, the flights were so hampered by the cover in this area that it becomes very difficult to keep up with which plane is in which flight, as different aircraft kept tacking on to new flights as visibility was attained. But the one thing that is certain is that at 20,000 feet, VMF 112 made contact with 12 to 14 Zeros, and a large dogfight began. In the ensuing action, chases were happening all over the sky, and one would involve Lieutenant Percy, who apparently saw a fellow Corsair under attack and went in to try and help him. This move would unfortunately bring the Zeros down upon himself. As Lieutenant Percy tried to save his fellow pilot, 6 Japanese fighters attacked him, and the fight became separated from the rest of the engagement, dropping down to a low altitude. And this is where the first of 2 extraordinary stories would unfold. Eventually, the Japanese pilots would score fatal hits to his Corsair, and with no other options, Lieutenant Percy was forced to bail out. But as he leapt from his cockpit, still taking fire, his altitude was too low. At about 2,000 feet, his parachute never had a chance to open, and he hit the water at a high speed, splashing down in the Pacific. As the Zeros left the pilot for dead, the dogfight continued. But alone in the water, against all odds, Lieutenant J.G. Percy had survived. With nothing more than a failed parachute to break his fall, he hit the water at high speed and suffered serious injuries. We can see the extent of his wounds in this portion of the report from that day. Lieutenant Percy, while chasing the Zero after Lieutenant Johnson, became separated and was attacked by at least 6 Zeros. He fought until his controls were shot away and then jumped at a very low altitude. Because of his low altitude, his parachute streamed behind him but did not open, and it is a miracle he is still alive. He hit the water, sustaining a broken pelvis, 2 sprained ankles, and numerous bruises. But the dogfight wasn't over, and neither were the stories of Corsair pilots surviving the impossible. Shortly thereafter, Lieutenant Sam Logan, one of the other Corsair pilots, had become separated from the rest of the pilots of VMF 112 and was now alone in the chaotic sky. As he broke through the clouds, he began to look for his squadron so he could regroup. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something unexpected. This would be a flight of P-40s, flown by the Royal New Zealand Air Force, also fighting against the Japanese. They had just arrived to assist in repelling the Japanese raid, but at the moment, it looked like they were in a tight spot. In fact, he spotted one of the P-40s with a Zero right on its 6. So Lieutenant Logan dove in to try and save his ally. After opening up with his 650 caliber guns, the lieutenant forced the Japanese fighter to abandon the P-40, but in doing so, exposed his own 6. Instantly, one of the other Zeros latched on to Logan and opened fire. He landed a burst on his Corsair, and immediately the F4U suffered fatal damage, and the young Marine was left with no choice but to abandon his aircraft at 18,000 feet. Like Lieutenant Percy, Lieutenant Sam Logan would also have a traumatic bailout experience. But Percy's issue had been that he had left his Corsair from too low of an altitude, while Lieutenant Logan would run into trouble from bailing out too high. For as many Pacific pilots would soon discover as the war went on, the Japanese were quickly becoming known for what they would do to stricken airmen. As soon as Lieutenant Sam Logan hit his chute, this unrealized threat became apparent when one of the Zeros that had just been battling him in the sky turned directly towards him and opened fire. Tracers and bullet streams whizzed by him but missed, and the Zero passed underneath and turned away. It was a close call, but apparently the Japanese pilot wasn't yet done. After circling around, he turned his nose yet again and opened up for a second time on the stricken Marine, and the sound of hot lead again broke the silence of the air around him. Lieutenant Logan attempted to sway in his chute, desperately trying to not make himself an easy target. And luckily, it either worked or the Zero pilot simply wasn't a sharp shot because he missed yet again and flew under the lieutenant. Still, he turned his plane around and decided to give one more pass to the parachuting Marine. Logan this time wasn't going to let himself float down until his enemy found his target. Instead, he tried to pull his parachute in to increase the speed of his descent and get him closer to the ocean. He hoped that this would get him out of harm's way, but unfortunately, it would place him directly in it. The Japanese pilot, as he opened fire in the third pass, apparently miscalculated the Marine's increased rate of descent. Instead of flying under his target as he had done on the first two passes, his propeller hit Lieutenant Sam Logan in the right foot, cutting it off as he hung in his chute. After this, the Japanese pilot was finally driven away by one of the P-40s who had arrived on the scene, ending the threat. But the damage was done. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but based on the way this report reads, I believe that after the Japanese pilot hit him with his propeller and cut away part of his foot, Lieutenant Logan may have actually applied a tourniquet and injected morphine as he floated down to the water after the injury was sustained. Then, according to the report, he landed and inflated his boat, dusting his wound and waiting for rescue, which would come shortly after. In the second miracle, in just a few minutes, Lieutenant Sam Logan survived a head-on collision with an enemy propeller while in his parachute. He would be taken to a hospital immediately where his right foot was amputated. Here we can see a newspaper from 1 month later with both Lieutenant Percy and Lieutenant Logan together in a hospital recovering from their wounds. It reads,
Lieutenant Sam Logan, who had his right foot cut off by propeller of Jap Zero, and Lieutenant J.G. Percy, pilot who survived a 2,000-foot unbroken fall when his parachute failed, are recuperating in a naval hospital at Pearl Harbor. And now the American flyers are avenging Japs' attack on Shootist. First Lieutenant Sam Logan, 22, of Paola, Kansas, is a Marine fighter pilot whose right foot was hacked off by the propeller of a Japanese Zero over the Solomons last month, while he hung helplessly in his parachute, and his fellow Corsair pilots haven't forgotten. Sam hasn't forgotten either, but he figures an artificial foot and a few months' rest will put him back in shape to fly again. Since the June day when a Zero pilot made 4 passes at him, as he parachuted toward the ocean 15,000 feet above the American-held Russell Islands, his squadron mates have shown the Japs no mercy. Logan was saved from possible death by a New Zealand pilot who came to his rescue and chased the Zero away after the Jap pilot had made 4 passes at him with machine guns chattering full blast. When he fell into the water, Logan opened his small life raft and gave himself first aid. 2 hours later, he was rescued by a Navy seaplane.
Just 1 month later, the pair were together in the hospital, wanting to fly again. One man who had bailed out with basically no parachute, and the other who was attacked to the point of being struck by an enemy plane. We, as fans of history, often like to remember how durable and rugged the F4U Corsair was. But perhaps stories like this can remind us that the Marine and Navy airmen who flew them were oftentimes just as difficult to kill. If you haven't yet, consider joining the TJ3 History newsletter for more great stories just like this one, totally free, sent right to your inbox at the link in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.